grade. We are here today with two lessons. We have 6.5 and 6.6. 6.5 focuses on the greatest common factor, which you typically hear called GCF. 6.6 talks about fractions in simplest form. There are only two vocab words that I want you to do, which are greatest common factor in simplest form, if you want to do those and then come back. All right, the GCF, or greatest common factor, is the biggest number that is a factor for all the numbers you're talking about. So you could be looking for the greatest common factor between two numbers, three numbers, four numbers. How many ever numbers you have, it is the biggest factor, the largest factor that goes into all of your numbers. Simplest form means that you have a fraction and the greatest common factor between your numerator and your denominator is 1. So there's no other common factor. 1 is the only common factor between your numerator and your denominator, and that means your fraction is in simplest form. Can't simplify it anymore. When we're talking about greatest common factors, there's a few ways that we can do this. Our three numbers are 8, 12, and 20. What you're going to do is list out the factors for all of your numbers. So you always have one in itself, and then sometimes you have other numbers. It's composite. You have other numbers that go into it as well. So we're going to list out all of our factors for our numbers here. All right, so we have all of our factors listed, and then we're looking for our greatest common factor. So the first thing you want to think about is, what common factors do I have? So you see there's a 2, of course there's a 1, but we don't really count that. There's a 2 on all of our lists, and there's a 4 on all of our lists. So our greatest common factor, our biggest number that goes into 8, 12, and 20 would be 4. That's how you figure out the greatest common factor, by listing out all of the factors for each number. There's another way you can do it, which is to make factor trees. And this way I generally don't recommend unless you're really stuck and you can't figure out what the greatest common factor is. So for factor trees, you are first going to make those factor trees, figure out what your prime factorization is for each of your numbers. So we have 2 times 2 times 2, 2 times 2 times 3, 2 times 2 times 5. So those are our prime factorizations. To figure out what is our greatest common factor, we're looking for things that are on all of our lists. So we have 2, we have another 2, and those are the only common factors amongst all of our lists. So our greatest common factor, we would say, is 2 times 2, which of course is 4, the same thing we got up there. The way that I would ask you guys to first do this is really and truly use your brains. So when you think about 8, 12, and 20, start with 8. Does 8 go into your other two numbers? So can you divide 12 divided by 8, 20 divided by 8 without a remainder? The answer is no. So you think about, well, what's the next smallest factor that goes into 8? It's 4. 12 divided by 4 work? Yes. Does 20 divided by 4 work? Yes. That's your greatest common factor. To start with your smallest number. If it goes into your other two numbers, you're done. That's your greatest common factor. If not, then you need to start thinking about your factors of your smallest number. do that because your smallest number is going to have almost always, if not always, your smallest number is going to have the least number of factors. So start there, work with your smaller number. Once you find something that goes into your other numbers without a remainder, then you know you're done. So let me show you what that looks like on a few examples here. For your first example, let's look at number 2. So number 2, we have 10 and 30. We start with our smaller number. It goes into 30 without a remainder, so our greatest common factor here is 10, our smaller number. Number 4, we have 12 and 18. 12 does not go into 18, so we need to come up with other things that go into 12. 6 is the next smallest factor that goes into 12. Does 6 go into 18? Yes, it does. No remainder. So our greatest common factor here is 6. Generally, this method is going to work. You don't normally need to list out all of your factors, and you definitely don't normally need to make factor trees. Resort to the listing if this isn't working for you, and as a last ditch effort, use factor trees. So factor trees is going to be the most work, but it's guaranteed to work for you. So if you're really, really stuck and you can't come up with your greatest common factor, use those factor trees. Definitely start with this method though, where you're looking at the smaller number first, seeing if it goes into your larger number without a remainder. Not start thinking about those factors of that smaller number and go from there. The 6s-6 is fractions in simplest form. What you're doing here is looking for your greatest common factor between your numerator and your denominator. If the answer to that question, what is your GCF between your numerator and your denominator? If your answer is 1, remember that that means your fraction is already simplified. There's nothing you can do. If not, though, you are going to have to simplify. So say we have the fraction 3/6. Well, my greatest common factor here is 3. So what I can do is divide my numerator and my denominator by 3. And I get my reduced fraction, which is 1/2. That's it. That's all there is to this. You're looking for that greatest common factor, dividing by it in your numerator and your denominator, and it gets you your simplified fraction. 7/8. Greatest common factor is 1. I'm done. My answer here, my simplified fraction, is 7/8. That's as simple as I can get. Next up, let's look at 25/45. So when I think about 25/45, 25 does not go into 45. My next factor in 25 would be 5, which does go into 45. So that's my GCF. And I divide, and I get 5/9. Next up, we have 80/100. So 80 does not go into 100. 40 would be your next factor. It doesn't go into 100. 20 would be your next one, and it works. So we're dividing our numerator and our denominator by 20, and we get 4/5. Sometimes, let me show you what happens if you don't come up with a GCF. So if you have 80/100, and rather than going to 20, say you decide to divide by 5. So we divide by 5, we divide by 5. Here we would get 16/20. Well, there's still a GCF that's larger than 1, so we'd have to keep going. So if you don't get your GCF right away, it's not the end of the world. You're just going to have to simplify again. So here I can say 4 goes into both of these, and then I will get 4/5. And notice it's the same thing we got when we used the GCF. It was just a step shorter when we found the GCF and used that. So don't fear if you are getting really stuck finding the GCF, just come up with any common factor, not necessarily the largest one, but any common factor, divide by that. The most important thing is that you divide by the same number in your numerator and your denominator. If not, it's an illegal math move and you just got the problem wrong. So make sure you are dividing by the same thing on the top and the bottom, and you just keep going until your GCF is 1, and then you know you have found the simplest form and you are done. What I would like you guys to try is on page 186, 3 to 18 by 3s, and page 189, 9 to 24 by 3s. So I will see you all soon with that homework review. Take care.